So thank you very much for all of you who are here live and those of you who are going to be seeing this later on at your own time. I'd like to start off by thanking Dr. Dan Peters, who is the co-founder and executive director of Summit Center, for his support of this really important topic of mothering gifted daughters. And I would love to also thank Elizabeth, who you just heard speaking. She's our communication director, and she put a lot of time and talent into helping make this a reality. I'd like to welcome Lea Stublarec, my colleague and friend. We met about 18 years ago when we were on a parenting committee for the National Association for Gifted Children. She is a social worker, a parent coach, a researcher, and she's so nice to share her groundbreaking study with us. So welcome, Lea.
Thanks so much, Paula. Thanks, Elizabeth. And I'd like to thank you all very much for being here. I'm Lea Stublarec, and this is my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Paula Wilkes, who served as a consultant on the study. Dr. Carol Dweck of Stanford University also generously helped with the design phase and suggested ideas for presenting the findings. In addition, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart all the amazing women who volunteered to be interviewed for the study, and Summit Center for hosting this webinar. A quick introduction: I'm a mother of 2 gifted daughters, one highly gifted and the other twice exceptional, gifted and learning disabled. And Paula Wilkes is the mother of a highly gifted daughter and 2 twice exceptional grandchildren. Embracing our own giftedness. Before we begin, I'd like to start by stating that for mothers of gifted daughters participating in this webinar, research has shown that it's highly likely that you're also gifted. But sadly, like a number of women in my study, it may take longer for some of us, maybe because of our socialization, to embrace this fact. Several mothers in the study shared that they used to think their daughter's giftedness came from their husbands, but they slowly realized, hold on, I'm pretty smart too. And if we want our daughters to embrace their giftedness, it's important for us to do the same. Let's see. Slide 4. Males are also negatively impacted by gender norms. Dr. Joanne Finkelstein states that research shows that children, both male and female, who reject strict gender norms tend to have higher self-esteem, do better academically, and are more psychologically healthy. On many levels, our culture's gender regime negatively impacts both sexes, limiting males as much as females. Along these lines, I highly recommend a new book by Ruth Whitman entitled Boy Mom: Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity, for any parents on the call raising boys as well as girls. Well, let's begin. The growth zone, the ideal. We all know that moment right after we become mothers that throws us almost instantly out of our comfort zone into the growth zone. Life in this zone involves a whirlwind of learning where we're forced to get up to speed quickly to meet the nearly overwhelming needs of a completely dependent human being, often with little experience or training for our new role as the primary caregiver. But for us as mothers of gifted daughters, we soon realize that our parenting journey involves an added layer of complexity. Because of this, we often find ourselves slipping into the panic zone, which restricts our ability to function at our best. And unfortunately, rather than realizing that the challenges and stresses we're dealing with are related to raising unique offspring in a society that neither accepts nor supports anything outside the norm, like gifted females, we tend to internalize our difficulties and feel like they're all our fault. And sadly, in our too ready to blame mom culture, this erroneous assumption is frequently reinforced. Let's see. Dr. Natalie Rimlinger's findings. The unique characteristics and needs of our young gifted daughters, like heightened sensitivity, boundless energy, and asynchronous development, set them apart from their peers and are often viewed as inappropriate, especially for little girls. And while some of these may be a source of pride for us, they can also serve as a red flag that a more atypical and stressful parenting adventure lies ahead. Dr. Natalie Rimlinger surveyed parents of gifted and found that they do, in fact, have a quantifiable and significantly elevated level of stress, one similar to parents with developmentally delayed children or children with serious psychological issues. The main goal of my study. After my daughters were launched, and let's be honest, are they ever truly launched? As a researcher and parent coach, I was curious about how other mothers experienced raising their gifted daughters. What were their challenges, their triumphs? My goal was to document and share their hard-earned wisdom with younger mothers of gifted girls. The sampling criteria for raising, the sampling criteria for mothers of successful adult gifted daughters. Several organizations who work with gifted families helped recruit mothers of successful adult gifted daughters for the study. A successful daughter was loosely defined as having graduated from college, a measure of academic achievement, and currently pursuing her passion, indicating that the daughter was attempting to maximize her potential. During the interviews, the mothers shared their personal criteria for determining their daughter's giftedness, offering overwhelming evidence of their high intellectual ability. After over 30 years of working with gifted families, the Gifted Development Center has learned that parents are excellent identifiers of giftedness in their children. Dr. Barbara Kerr underscores this in her book, Smart Girls, A New Psychology of Girls, Women, and Giftedness. Quote, "My experience has been that parents who suspect their child is gifted are correct 99% of the time, making parental judgment one of the best assessments around." The sampling criteria were chosen in hopes of coming up with proxy measures for, quote, successful daughters. But as we know, defining success is a daunting and controversial topic, especially as it relates to females. As luck would have it, I believe that all but one of the 58 daughters were highly functional members of society at the time of data collection. The one exception was a daughter currently taking a break. After achieving 2 masters and working in related fields, her mother described her as currently soul searching to try to figure out what she wanted to do next. And although the majority of daughters were in fact pursuing their passion, nearly 30% were struggling to follow their dream at the time of data collection and were working in jobs not directly related to what they loved most. Many were employed in jobs that helped pay the bills, like student loans, were a better fit with their current needs and in some cases physical limitations, as well as the needs of their families, or allowed them to evaluate career options more aligned with their calling while still being productive. These professional struggles seem typical of the challenges many gifted women face. How the data was collected. 43 mothers who'd raised 58 daughters that met the sampling criteria were interviewed twice, with each interview lasting 1 to 2 hours. As Dr. Carol Dweck suggested, 20 of the 58 daughters were also interviewed for about an hour each. The total number of study participants was 63, and the total number of interviews was 106. These interviews were transcribed and coded and then edited by each study participant to ensure accuracy and confidentiality. Description of the mothers. The mothers were mainly in their 50s and 60s. They were highly educated. 93% had a bachelor's and 70% had graduate degrees. And not surprisingly, nearly all were gifted. All but 5 were engaged in income-producing work at least some of the time while raising their daughters, although the so-called, quote, non-working women were actively involved in volunteer activities during this period, and 2 homeschooled their daughters. One of these returned to full-time paid employment when her 3rd child took off for college, traveling the world for an international medical corporation for 20 years. 5 of the mothers worked in the public arena the entire course of their parenting journey. The remaining 77% fell somewhere in between, moving in and out of income-producing work, depending upon their personal need for self-actualizing outside the home, the needs of their family, financial problems, career opportunities that popped up, and/or available childcare. One mother described this approach to self-actualizing as, quote, Forrest Gumping. In this case, if Forrest was female and exceptionally bright. In general, the 43 women were intellectually curious, highly energetic, intense, sensitive, and quite talkative. They all led very active lives. One woman in her late 70s stated that she always had more to do than she could fit into any one day. They pursued a variety of interests. One mother got her pilot's license at 60, much to her daughter's delight. And they remained involved with their children and in many cases their grandchildren. Hearing their life stories was fascinating. In general, they were, as psychologist Michael Pachowski would describe them, quote, quiveringly alive. But I must admit I was often exhausted after each interview trying to process everything that both they and their daughters had experienced and accomplished. I agree with Anne Marie Roper, who opined about how unfortunate it is that we let so much of the invaluable wisdom of our elders go down the drain. And I would add that this is especially true for gifted female elders who thrived despite all odds and successfully nurtured their gifted girls in the process. Let's see. Description of the daughters' intelligence levels. Nearly all the mothers stated that their girls demonstrated gifted characteristics very early on, like sensitivity, high emotionality, little need for sleep, a constant drive and curiosity, as well as being very advanced in some areas, but delayed in others. Even though it was only later for some that they realized these were related to their daughter's high intelligence. 77% of the 58 daughters had been in gifted programs and or had high IQ scores, ranging from 130 to over 180. In 6 cases, the daughters were twice exceptional, unidentified in the primary grades, but demonstrating giftedness in high school, college, and beyond. In the remaining cases, the daughters attended highly competitive private schools where they were academic superstars. In fact, nearly all the daughters had received numerous accolades related to high intellectual ability at some point during their academic years. Overview of the daughters' academic careers. The daughters were slightly more educated than their mothers. 100% were college grads and 75% had a graduate degree or were in grad school. But given their younger ages, most were in their late 20s to early 40s, this difference in educational level most likely increased after the study was completed. The majority apparently loved learning. There were 6 daughters, 1 with an MD, PhD, 1 was in vet school, 8 were PhDs, 1 of these was currently in law school, 9 were PhD candidates, 3 were attorneys, 2 of these also had masters, 3 had MBAs, 1 of these had a master's as well, 11 had masters, and 1 was a master's candidate. Overview of their careers. Looking at the daughters' careers, excluding a handful in school full-time, provides a menu of career choices younger gifted daughters may want to consider. 26 of the daughters were involved in STEM-related fields. These included 6 MDs, a DBM resident, a marine biologist, 2 engineers, a professor in biology and genetics, a postdoctoral student in bioinformatics, computer specialist, a web designer, nurse practitioners, radiology, MRI specialist, and a high school calculus teacher. For those daughters not in STEM, 3 were professors, 2 were attorneys, 3 were corporate executives, 1 was a financial consultant, 1 was a high school English teacher and gifted education coordinator, 1 was an attorney teaching high school English, 3 worked for nonprofit organizations, and 1 was doing research in Asia. Finally, there was 1 journalist, a playwright, a graphic artist, a real estate broker, a director of a national law enforcement agency, and 1 daughter employed by an insurance company, hoping for her big break in the opera, while still singing and taking voice lessons in her free time. Unfortunately, her mother shared that she was incredibly talented, but tended to clutch during tryouts. 25 of the daughters were mothers themselves, with all but 4 involved in income-producing work. For these 4 women, their primary passion was caring for their children full-time. One of these young mothers was interviewed. She was an engineer who dropped out of a PhD program to raise 5 children, several who were profoundly gifted, which was her passion, although she hoped to teach at a community college when her children were grown. The resilience, capability, and adaptability of the sample. Nearly all the 101 females in the study, the 43 mothers and 58 daughters, were thriving, and most had achieved significant personal and professional success. This is a testament to the resilience, capability, and adaptability of these bright women to overcome the adversity of living in our anti-intellectual patriarchal society. I'd like to share an example highlighting how one mother, like many others in the study, succeeded despite all odds in nurturing her gifted offspring with little support, while at the same time following her passion. At the time of the interviews, this veteran mother was in her 60s completing her PhD. She chose to raise her offspring as a single mother because she felt her husband would have had a negative influence on her children. She taught elementary school, but had to supplement her income to support her family. She sewed wedding dresses after school. Quote, "For many years, I made more making wedding dresses than I did teaching, but teaching is my love." And she delivered newspapers at night while her children slept in the back of her station wagon. Quote, "One year, I remember getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to deliver newspapers. I'd pile all the kids in the back of the station wagon with pillows and blankets, and I'd deliver my newspapers, and they could sleep while I was doing that." This gifted female succeeded in raising 4 highly functioning adults, and continued this legacy by being actively involved in nurturing her many grandchildren. The series, Legacy, Mothers of Gifted Daughters Share Their Wisdom. Given the amount of data collected from the in-depth interviews, the wisdom the 63 interviewed women shared was more than enough to fill 3 books. So the findings are presented in a series called Legacy, Mothers of Gifted Daughters Share Their Wisdom. The first book in the series is The Perfect Storm, which highlights the challenges mothers of gifted daughters face. The second book, Conquering the Storm, will present the approach the mothers use to tackle these challenges, while the third book, Celebration, will share the messages they specifically wanted to impart to younger mothers of gifted girls and what they wish they'd done differently in hindsight. The objective of The Perfect Storm. Because knowledge is power, the objective of this first book, The Perfect Storm, is to provide women with an awareness of the unique hurdles common to raising an extremely smart girl in today's culture. My goal was to encourage younger mothers to widen the lens through which they view their outside-the-box parenting experiences and appreciate the external factors negatively impacting their lives. With this informed perspective, gifted mothers may begin to reject living as captives of their conditioning and go on to create their own, more empowering counter-realities. As Einstein stated, a problem can't be solved by the same consciousness that created it. But this book is not just a collection of challenges. The Perfect Storm offers hope and serves as a reminder to younger mothers struggling to meet their neurodivergent daughters' needs that they're not alone. They're part of a community of veteran gifted mothers who understand, united by the golden thread of motherhood, and who shared their most intimate, heartfelt stories about one of the most meaningful and challenging experiences of their lives in order to support younger moms. Their stories demonstrate that it's possible to navigate the obstacles placed in both their parenting and professional paths. The narrative environment our girls grow up in. Gifted girls grow up hearing myths about what it means to be female, exceptionally bright, and mothers. These serve as a narrative presence that underscores their lives and creates cultural norms that oftentimes squelch their ability to thrive. These stories inform how, quote, well-behaved girls, smart females, and good mothers, end quote, should look and act. Often, without even realizing it, we internalize these expectations and scripts, which for the most part are not based on biology or genetics. They're carefully constructed, forming cultural straitjackets, if you will, designed to maintain the status quo and protect the patriarchy by giving men more power. They serve to keep gifted females in their, quote, appropriate place, which diminishes our strengths and silences our voices. This cultural mold isn't new. It's been passed down through generations. We're socialized to prioritize external validation over internal truth. We compromise our own neurodivergent needs and those of our daughters to fit a system that doesn't serve us. We ignore the powerful intuition that tells us something's wrong because we're afraid to challenge the established order. And in doing so, we often ignore or repress the very wisdom that resides inside our hearts. The myths about females. First, they're the stories and obstacles we encounter related to our gender. Starting from birth, these misogynistic tales and attitudes not only inform us of our place in society, but also dictate our behavior and appearance. One profoundly gifted daughter in the study stated she felt stuck in a box because she was born female. Sadly, the amount of time, energy, and resources gifted females spend on fitting in and looking, quote, good can negatively impact their ability to maximize their potential. However, if a gifted girl tries to be her authentic self in public, it can lead to some painful consequences, like getting shamed, left out, and or ridiculed. For example, several mothers described how their daughters chose to totally reject the norms for appropriate appearance by failing to practice over-the-top daily hygiene, or by wearing all black makeup and outfits, or donning colorful wigs and crazy costumes. And as a result, they were rejected by their peers. One mother shared that her twice exceptional daughter, who she described as her, quote, out-of-the-box child, went to a preppy, wealthy public high school and expressed her uniqueness through her creative outfits, piercings, and wild hair colors, which caused her to be ostracized from the group. According to this mother, she's still dressing weird. She's never going to be a J. Crew Gap Brooks Brothers kid, but I just let that go because she eventually found her niche in anthropology at an Ivy League school where they just loved her, and she's doing research in Asia now. Several mothers also mentioned that their daughters often behaved like a bull in a china shop, loudly expressing their opinions and didn't suffer fools gladly. Although these mothers seemed proud of their daughters for having the strength of their conviction to speak up, many were concerned about the cultural backlash this behavior invited and admitted that they wished their daughters would just tone it down a bit. This speaks to the internal conflict mothers experience, wanting to encourage our daughters to be all they can be, but burdened by our role as society's agents of socialization and fearing for the negative reactions our daughters will have to deal with. But not having a powerful female voice and presence in the public sphere has helped to ensure inequality between the sexes for generations, as evidenced in the pay gap, double standards, skewed distribution of parenting and domestic responsibilities, and women's current battle for reproductive freedom. Sheryl Sandberg declared in her controversial book, Lean In, quote, "The promise of equality is not the same as true equality. A truly equal world would be one where women ran half our countries and companies and men ran half our homes," end quote. Based on these criteria, we've got a long way to go. The myths about female giftedness. Since historically there aren't many eminent women, societies assume that females just aren't that gifted, ignoring the systemic issues that created this sad reality. An awareness of the limiting cultural stories that have impacted female eminence starts early in a gifted girl's life. By age 6, research has found that girls are less likely to believe that they can be really, really smart, and they start avoiding activities said to be for really smart children. Then, beginning as early as 9 or 10, many gifted girls get the message that it's not cool for a girl to be exceptionally bright. They begin to feel pressure to dumb themselves down or resort to other protective behaviors to survive in a hostile peer culture. Like many daughters in my study, they may choose to don thorns by developing prickly personalities, put on masks, and pretend to be a, quote, dumb blonde, as one mom described the actor's second gifted daughter put on, in order not to be socially rejected like her gifted older sister, or protect themselves by going into a shell, only emerging when they find themselves in college surrounded by their smart tribe. Or, as one mother shared, they may develop false personas. Quote, "Our daughter did something kind of weird in her after-school weaving class in middle school. She can put on an accent really, really well, so she decided that she was a little Scottish girl. She finally confessed to me. I think what happened was that she went to about 3/4 of the classes until she told me that she didn't really want to go anymore. I probed a little bit about why not, and she felt like she didn't want to keep maintaining this false identity and didn't know how to say, hey, I've just been making fools out of all of you. I'm from the southwestern part of this state, just like you." She knew she had a little bit of a lying problem. I think it was just that she wanted to be somebody else. So if it was possible for her to just kind of pretend that she had some experience, she'd be willing to say she did, even if she didn't. Did I tell you about when she was in college before she dropped out for a semester, she told the professor that both of her parents were dead? Well, she was kind of depressed on and off for maybe her last year in high school and maybe the whole time that she was at the state school. What was amazing to me was that she was going to class, getting good grades and attending this and that, so I never really thought of her as depressed. But the last semester that she was at the state university, she said, "I want to drop out." And at the same time, a professor called us about a class she was taking and hadn't attended recently. This is a terrible story. When the professor called, he asked to speak to the guardian and then asked who I was. So I said, "I'm her mother." And he seemed uncomfortable and finally responded, "Your daughter told us you were dead." She'd established a completely, I'm not really fond of this, but I can kind of laugh at it now. She established a completely different identity and she knew she needed to drop out because she just didn't want to maintain it anymore. I think as she got more depressed, she didn't want to be herself. She wanted to be somebody else. So when she enrolled in 1 or 2 of his classes, she became a girl from the Netherlands. I'm not sure whether she said she'd been adopted or whether she'd just been sponsored by this family who took her in. And of course, whenever she wanted to say anything about one of the paintings that were shown in this class, she'd talk about how she visited that museum, and she knew all these details because she had this incredible memory and had read about it. As a result, she'd been a great star in his class, and so he was very concerned about her. Why wasn't she coming anymore? So I said, "Oh, I think this is maybe a bigger problem than either you or I realize, and I don't know if she's going to be coming back to your class or not." And he was super nice. He said, "Well, I had a daughter who had some problems and was kind of depressed." He was just really nice and made it very easy for me to accept this very shocking thing that, hey, Everything was not all right. So she withdrew for a semester because the jig was up. It wasn't like I yelled at her. It was like, I remember having this talk with her and she told me later it was a very important talk. I basically said, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do anymore because you're an adult now. You don't have to go to school to please me or just because you have to. So you decide what you want to do, but you can't live at home. Essentially, I think we brought both of our kids up to think, when you're 18, you leave home. This is part of your job, and we've taught you how to do that as best we can. So I think she took that advice to heart. She knew she didn't want to be in school anymore. She had a friend who'd she known sort of distantly, and they rented an apartment in our town. But we didn't see her every day. We didn't talk to her every day. I think she saw a therapist for a little while. You know, the timeline is all muddled, probably partly because I wanted to forget it. She took some medication. She got herself in shape enough so that by the end of the spring, she decided she wanted to transfer and that she did want to study art history. She found herself a full-time job doing all kinds of crappy things. And I think that was part of what convinced her she wanted to go back to school. And then she went on to get a PhD. We were pretty burnt out for a while. Still, when our daughter calls, my husband's like, you get that, because if it's a problem, I don't want to talk to her. The limits schools place on both males and females. In addition to limits placed on gifted girls specifically, they must confront those that both gifted males and females face in our school system, which are basically based on the myth that because they're so smart, they can just take care of themselves. A number of daughters in my study were not challenged in school until college, and often describe themselves as spending years being bored and yearning to be more engaged intellectually. One of the worst examples was shared by the mother of a profoundly gifted daughter. Quote, double promotion is great if you have a teacher that's going to take a kid beyond. After being double promoted, my daughter was still smarter than everybody else in the class by far. And the story becomes kind of sad in that by 5th grade, the teacher didn't know what to do with her as far as giving her advanced materials. She was reading long novels and could do all the other work. The teacher had a closet in her classroom. It was about 2 feet by 3 feet. So the teacher gave my daughter a rug and a flashlight and told her that the closet would be your own personal, quote, reading spot. So my daughter spent her days in 5th grade in the teacher's closet. And when the other kids left and went to PE or recess or whatever, the teacher would just kind of forget about her. The mother shared that this went on all year long and she was outraged. I was just livid. It was just beyond me that this teacher couldn't provide anything better for her than her closet and a flashlight. This mom wanted to go to the school board and scream, is this the best you can do for a kid? But my daughter was happy there. She was like, oh, good. I get to be in the closet away from all those kids. She couldn't stand their behavior problems in class, and she hated them making fun of her and her books. Even the lunchroom people in the cafeteria would say to her, put the book down. You need to be talking to people. So she wasn't getting a lot of good feedback. And being much younger than the other kids, PE was not her thing. She wasn't athletic. So school was not a real fun experience. And she already knew what they were doing in math and science and whatever else. So why be out there with the kids that were giving her trouble? She was just as happy to be in the closet. I was horrified, but I didn't make a huge fuss about it because we were working on implementing the full-time program for kids with IQs over 150. And I thought, if we can just get through this year, she'll be somewhere else next year. And fortunately, she was. Finding a true peer. Another challenge for gifted children, especially gifted girls, is finding a friend. Dr. Moraka Gross found that gifted children, especially girls, were seeking friends with whom they could develop close and trusting relationships. At ages when their more neurotypical age peers were just looking for play partners. Jill Williford Werman underscores this, stating that a gifted child often seeks not a buddy, but a soulmate, and nothing short of that will do. And if they do find someone, they may become so thrilled at the idea of making a friend that they throw themselves into the relationship wholeheartedly. This behavior can be disconcerting to potential friends who begin to view the gifted girl as, quote, more, or sadly, maybe just too much. In addition, because of their high IQs, their chances of finding a true intellectual peer are low, given how few individuals fall within their intelligence bracket. Myths about motherhood. The third category of limiting cultural myths relates to motherhood. Basically, we learn that females should be the ones in charge of the home, taking care of everybody and everything because of biology or hormones or just because. This has kept females primarily responsible for just about everything in the domestic sphere. and enabled men to feel entitled to women's free labor. For gifted mothers, learning to love yourself and to self-actualize in an anti-intellectual culture and in a patriarchal country founded on the idea that women were less than, whereas a woman, and especially as a mother, you're treated like a second-class citizen in the work world, and where the 24/7 role of nurturing your neurodiverse offspring that you consider more important than anything you've ever done is devalued and little community support is available. Learning to love yourself and self-actualize in the middle of this perfect storm is quite an achievement. In fact, it's a miracle. Because the criteria for success and eminence in our society have been shaped by men, women charged with primary caregiving have been disqualified from becoming famous. Have you ever heard of an eminent caregiver? This is a sad statement, given that many mothers are truly heroes, resilient warriors tasked with ensuring that their children not only survive but thrive despite all odds, but whose success stories go untold because they're undervalued in our culture. The majority of mothers in my study created a new paradigm for self-actualization. Despite their field, most of the mothers were employed in a variety of positions over the course of their work history. Nearly all the mothers prioritized their role as primary caregiver, as well as the demands of their partner's career over their own career goals. As a result, they moved in and out of jobs depending upon the needs of their family, their need to self-actualize outside the home, job opportunities that popped up, and or available childcare. As stated earlier, one mother described this nonlinear, intermittent career path as Forrest Gumping. In fact, one mom listed more than a dozen different career lives and still counting. But she noted that as she aged, she now had to dye her gray hair to even be considered for a job. In fact, this may represent a positive way to self-actualize in the long run for both men and women. Dr. Wilkes shared a new perspective on how best to visualize a career path. Quote, "Be willing to let go of your dream to get what you need. We often have blinders on that keep us narrowly focused on our quote goal and the steps we think we have to take to achieve it. But maybe the universe has something better in mind for you and wants to help you manifest your gifts in a different way. Take off your blinders and explore the off-ramps along your path, and you might find yourself at a better place than anything you could have ever imagined." End quote. Recognizing the difficulty we're faced with because of the rigid cultural script for gifted females and mothers is a huge first step in breaking out of this mold and removing our blinders. Realizing that the definition of a quote perfect mother and society's definition of success are simply social constructs, as in made up, not immutable truths, and not the way life has to be, allows us to reject the stories and myths handed down to us through generations that simply don't apply to the reality of our lives. We can write our own narratives. As author Beth Berry put it in her book, Motherwhelmed, we can, quote, change into wiser, more compassionate, and more self-actualized versions of ourselves. In a healthy, balanced, woman-honoring culture, motherhood would not be a lifelong sentence to poorly met needs, self-denial, and longing for the freedom we once felt, but a sacred, supported rite of passage into a rich, fertile, fruitful phase of life. Motherhood is meant to grow us and affirm our sense of worthiness, not further compromise it, end quote. As the mothers in my study grew more aware of their own neurodivergent characteristics, as well as their daughters, they began to speak up, both for their special needs, driven by self-love and a deep love for their girls. This advocacy sparked their personal growth and transformation. They began questioning the status quo and the cultural barriers limiting the potential of bright females. Their love for their daughters helped them find their voice and realize the need to genuinely embrace and express their authentic gifted selves, not only to help their daughters thrive, but to empower their own self-actualization. This is critical for every gifted mother raising a gifted girl, because now, more than ever, society desperately needs to unleash the invaluable resource of gifted female potential and make the world a better place in the process. Some of the challenges identified by the sampled mothers. First, balancing our intense drive and rage to achieve professionally with our desire to be, quote, good mothers who only prioritize our family's needs. Self-actualizing as mothers in an era of greedy jobs, requiring employees to be on call 24/7 with little support. Addressing our own neurodiversity, as well as that of other quiveringly alive family members, like intensity, sensitivity, and high energy. Feeling confident about performing our feeling conflicted about performing our quote duty as mothers to socialize our daughters by forcing them into a cultural straitjacket. Reliving the painful experiences we had growing up gifted when our daughters are facing similar problems. And some more challenges. Dealing with and nurturing our gifted daughters' unique needs and characteristics on a 24/7 basis. Understanding and accepting our daughter's asynchronous development, which may include a fierce independent streak despite being regressed in some key life skills. Appreciating that our daughters feel safest at home, which may mean dealing with their emotional upheavals and rage against an unjust world. Finding schools that are a good fit year in and year out. Accepting that our daughters may not always go along with what we think is best for them, like enrolling in gifted classes, switching to a better school, getting professional help, or skipping a grade or two. And a few more challenges. Helping our girls find a friend while their IQ makes finding a true peer challenging. Dealing with friends and family who are critical of our outside-the-box parenting approach, although we believe it best nurtures our atypical daughters. Finding professional support knowledgeable about giftedness, like that offered by Summit Center. Feeling isolated and uncomfortable discussing issues our gifted girls face with parents of more neurotypical children. Having to overcome cultural messages that silence women and find our voice to advocate for our daughters' special needs as well as our own. And finally, I'd like to conclude by sharing the highlights of one mother's parenting journey. The mother in this example raised 2 children on her own while working full-time and taking night classes to earn a college degree. Here is her story about successfully raising her gifted daughter in the middle of this perfect storm. Quote, "Raising my daughter was a challenge. She was always a challenge from birth. When I had my son, it was the easiest thing in the world. He took naps, 2 naps a day. He'd sit in the corner and entertain himself. He was just a wonderful, laid-back, easy-to-raise child. Then I had the second one. She was just so much trouble from the beginning. As an infant, she would take an hour nap a day. She was always busy, going and going. I had to put her on a leash because she would have been dead, lost. She would just follow whatever interested her, and I'd lose her in a store. So I just gave up and said, I have to put this kid on a leash. And it was always like that. Always a struggle to get her to go to bed. I had to finally trick her. I didn't want to lock her in a room because I thought that would traumatize her. So I put baby oil on the doorknob so she couldn't get out as quickly. I was desperate, and I couldn't get her in preschool fast enough. But her male kindergarten teacher didn't like her. He didn't like loud children, and my daughter can't whisper. My daughter is just loud. So from the start, school was a bad experience. I knew just based on her emotional state that there was something different about her. She'd get really upset if she couldn't do something perfectly. She had to go to bed. She'd go to bed crying if she couldn't get things. In maybe the 2nd or 3rd grade, she got almost hysterical about a homework assignment, something that she couldn't quite get. It really scared me that she was so in knots over her desperate need to be perfect. And my daughter had a hard time following the rules around the house, especially as she got older. We needed quiet at night so we could get some sleep, but she'd be on the phone and laughing. And like I said before, she can't whisper. So there'd be a lot of fighting and storming out of the house. She'd end up spending the night at a friend's house sometimes, telling us we'd gotten on her last nerve. Her junior year in high school, she just got tired of all of it. Her band instructor threw an eraser at her because she was questioning his rules. And she had another teacher tell her flat out, the girls can't do science. She wasn't learning anything in this large public school that offered no advanced or gifted classes. So she deliberately became a truant to get into the independent studies program and get a GED. To get into this program, you either had to be truant or pregnant. So I told her that at least she made the right choice there. There was nothing for her at her high school in terms of challenging her brain. But when she became a truant, it got even less pleasant. Nobody in her family has ever dropped out of high school. I thought I'd lost her. I really did. I thought she was going to be a welfare mom. The worst. It was really awful. She got her GED, but after several years of doing odd jobs, my daughter started going to the local commuter college while living at home. She was a psychology major, and I think she was doing that primarily to understand herself, as well as her relationship with me, because it was always a challenge between the two of us. But my daughter, who was mixed, came home one day after learning about a program to encourage students of color to study STEM and just said, I'm going to medical school. This was the beginning of her senior year in college. She didn't have the math. She didn't have the science. We didn't think she'd do it. We thought, oh, this is just a crazy idea, but she did it. I think that was the first time that I realized that she was really, really smarter than the rest of us. It made a drastic change in my parenting, knowing that my daughter was so gifted, because up until then, I thought she was just being an obnoxious teenager. I really did. And after realizing she was very bright, I always thought she got her giftedness from my father. It took me years to realize that I was also gifted. I grew up thinking that I was pretty stupid, and it dawned on me during my second attempt at college that I just think faster than I can talk. But my daughter still doesn't think she's gifted, despite having an MD, PhD from one of the top healthcare centers in the country. When I told her about the study, she said, I'm not gifted. That was the first thing that came out of her mouth. And looking back on our relationship, you had two very intelligent women discussing controversial issues. And even though we were basically agreeing, we could be the loudest and most argumentative pair ever in the family. It was a joke. Even if we were agreeing, it was just all semantics. Well, my daughter realizes now that she was lucky. Thank God she finally knows it and appreciates that I was her mother. She realized this after she got into therapy. She turned to therapy because she could tell that she alienated people and she wanted to figure out why. I was guilty of it too when I was younger, expecting everybody else to understand what we understand and being very condescending. I could smack myself for treating people the way I did when I was younger. This was part of the reason I didn't fit in, I think. After I finally got help, my therapist said, if you don't stop expecting people to be perfect, you're not going to have any friends. And the good part about this is you don't have to be perfect either. It was like somebody hit me over the head with a 2x4. It's completely changed my approach to people. My daughter was smart to get help at a younger age than me. My daughter had some issues about her mixed race because of the things people would say to her. She took things more to heart, while my son could just care less. Now she's got more of a sense of humor about it, although she's still sometimes asked to get the coffee at meetings by people who don't realize who she is. Going through all this turmoil, raising my daughter was the worst thing, but she's a doctor now. She's a responsible person now. It was always a struggle for her to understand the normal rules of life, because I wanted her to be able to function as a contributing member of society. I think what helped was that I never gave up on her. For example, when she'd storm out of the house in high school, it was never like, okay, you leave the house and you can never come back. It was never like that. It was always, the storm's over, come back, we'll try again. She'd always come home the next day. It was just one of those storms. We just kept always trying again, trying to break through whatever it was. She was pushing us away too and pushing other people away. I know she was just going through hell, and we haven't talked about all that yet. I'd like to know what was going through her head at those times. And she was not a very good driver. I let her have my big old Oldsmobile because I wanted her to be safe. And I told everybody I knew, if you see that blue Oldsmobile coming, get out of the way. She drove fast. She had rage, you know, but then she got into a couple of wrecks and that finally calmed her down because it scared her and turned her into a much better driver. I swear, I didn't think I was going to survive her adolescence now that we're talking about all these things. When she got accepted into the MD PhD program in another part of the country, she didn't really want to relocate there, but she really wanted to do the program, so it was worth it. And she needed to leave home. I really hated to see her go, but she really needed to go and find out who she was. And we actually got closer after she moved. We talked more. We had to because the phone was the only way to connect, and it was a really good thing. I think being female made all the difference in my daughter's life. If she'd been a guy, it would have just been normal for her to be so smart. Even after all the advances we've made for women, it's still hard for women. Just 20 years ago, they didn't think that women were smart enough to do the combined MD PhD program. She wouldn't have gotten accepted. It's just unbelievable that we're still fighting sexist beliefs like this. Well, it was never boring. She's fun. She's really a fun person to be around. She's funny, and she can make fun of people by impersonating their voices and mannerisms. I remember one Christmas where she was doing Yoda at the table. We just have a great time together. I think it takes love to get past this stuff. I hear about women who don't bond with their children, and I don't know how you could possibly survive a challenge like this. But sometimes when my daughter was younger, I felt like if I just put my heart and soul into this, I won't have problems. And then when you have problems, you feel like you failed somehow. I feel like I failed several times. Like when she was dropping out of school, a truant, where could I take her? The alternatives were horrible. But fortunately, both of our daughters turned out okay. In spite of all of our mistakes, I believe it comes back to love. For more information about the study and or the book, The Perfect Storm, please contact me at my email address or at my website, gifteddaughters.com. Thanks so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Lea. Let's see, Paula can turn on her video. Excellent. Paula, I think you're still muted.
You can't hear my voice?
Now we can.
Okay.
There we go.
Good.
So everyone, we're going to take questions now. I'm going to start at the beginning. Our first question was, can you please share the racial and socioeconomic demographics of your sample?
Sure. Unfortunately, the sample wasn't very racially diverse. Let's see, all but a handful of mothers and 49 of the 58 daughters were white. There was more geographic diversity across the cases. 3 mothers lived outside the US and the other 40 mothers were scattered across the country. And financially, there was also greater diversity. Let me see if I have those statistics. Oh, yeah. Let me see. I'll just read this. While 93% of the mothers were married at the time of the interviews, over half mentioned experiencing marital problems while their children were growing up. In fact, 1 mother in 4 was single at some point while raising her daughter. Half of this subset of mothers mentioned experiencing serious financial stress during this period. Conversely, nearly 20% were in the upper middle class or upper class income bracket. And I guess I just want to add, this economic diversity seemed to confirm the theory that giftedness crosses all income levels.
Okay. And then another person asked, do you think that these myths are still mostly true in Silicon Valley today? They asked that when you were talking about the myths of about women. And, yeah.
Paula, do you want to add anything to that, or
The one about the myths?
if we think they're still around today?
Well, I definitely think they are. I don't live in the Silicon Valley. And I know when it comes to tech, there are more women than there used to be. And I know when you look at the numbers of women in grad school, how sometimes that's even more than men. And yet, unbelievably, when it comes to the highest rankings in different professions, it still isn't women, even when there are majority women, you know, in different classes within an organization. The top still tend to be men. So when you think about gifted women, there is really a ceiling. And I also notice with women of the younger generation, I mean, Lea and I both have grandkids now, but of younger generations, that it's still moms work at work and moms work at home. They're the ones who make the summer plans, you know, arranging for summer camps. More of the moms tend to, when the child has a problem related to school or an IEP or a 504 plan, the moms are the ones who, a greater number of them, are advocating for their children. So what the quote that Lea had read about leaning from the book Leaning In, the author of Leaning In, it will be truly equitable when as many men are, you know, at home doing those kind of things as there are women in the field. So I definitely see that many of those myths still exist.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next is a set of comments that lead into a question, I think. And again, these were typed in when you were talking earlier. My daughter is so friendly that everyone in her class is her friend or best friend, even in the other class. And then the question, if she's so friendly, we're worried how she will know not to go with other people who aren't trustworthy. And followed by a comment, my daughter, this is the same person. My daughter is advanced, gifted. She's getting bored in class as she is advanced with her age. We let her go to her class so she can make new friends and play, but we want her to grow more and learn to utilize her giftedness. However, there are other options where we can do an online class. I guess that's...
Paula, would you like to handle that?
Yeah, sure. I would say one of the most important things that we can be doing with all gifted kids, but especially gifted daughters, is to teach them to be autonomous learners. There was something called the six holistic types of gifted, and the sixth type that we're trying to get all these gifted kids to be really is the autonomous learner. So they know their strengths, they know their challenges, they know how to use the system to their betterment. And this is very hard to develop in elementary school, and some don't even get it by the time they're graduating from high school. Many kids are used just to having the adult, often moms, come in and step in for them. So I think it's nice when we can have our girls come into IEP meetings, 504 meetings, parent conferences, so they can see how we advocate for them, because really what we want them to do is to be able to advocate for themselves. So if they're in a class, let's say, where they're able to do the math easily, they may say to the teacher, I think I'm capable of doing this. Can you give me the hardest problems that you're going to be teaching? I mean, there has to be a way that the kids stand up for themselves and say, you know how to do it. And then if they continue to get pushback from educators, then that's a really good time for you as the parent to step up. And I just want to say something, Lea read something from some parents who didn't feel good about the educational system, but, she has a daughter who's an educator. I was a public school teacher for 25 years, so it isn't as though there's no teacher who's doing a good thing, or there's no school out there that's doing a good thing. It's very difficult to be an educator now because of, just all the kinds of issues that kids bring to school. But I think if we could teach our daughters to learn self-advocacy tools and become autonomous learners, we'd be going a long way to helping them.
That's such an important point, Paula. And I should mention that 70% of the moms that were interviewed were involved in education. And so they went into classrooms wearing both hats, so they could really appreciate the issues that a lot of their gifted students were struggling with.
Okay, more questions are coming in and comments as well. This is the same mom who gave the previous comments. At another point in your talk, she said, I have a similar daughter. We are able to overcome and we are now moving forward. I like the story. I can really relate, but my daughter is still young. Okay, so, and then next, is it possible that the giftedness of my daughter came from mothers? I think she means the mother. You said that in your talk.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
The person who had earlier asked the question about are the myths still true? She was also asking about the myth of expectations in schools for girls, not just in the workforce. So I don't know if you want to talk about that. There's, again, more questions are coming in. So
Paula, do
next,
you want to speak to that, or?
myths of expectations in school for girls, that one?
Yes.
I would be hard pressed to give an answer for that one, because it depends upon the school, it depends upon the teacher, it depends, there's just, I wouldn't really know across the board.
I think that's such a good point, Paula, because my sense raising my girls was that things they changed all the time, you know. So one year you might have a teacher who really appreciated and understood gifted girls and was accelerating them and helping them and nurturing them. And then the next year you might have a completely different experience. So it seemed like it was really variable.
I think that's true for boys and girls.
Yes,
in
yes.
Yeah. Okay, our next question. What types of school environments seem to be the best for gifted girls, both for academics and for supporting on the socio-emotional development? Asking as a mom of someone who demonstrates asynchronous development and needs a lot of different types of support. Similar to what we were just talking about.
Well, my sense from the study was that the 58 gifted daughters were all pretty different in terms of what their needs were. And, you know, as I mentioned in there were some who didn't want to be involved themselves in the gifted classes. And in those cases, their mother supported that. And, you know, some who needed to be radically accelerated. And some, there were a number who changed schools often trying to find a good learning environment. So I think it's so individualistic, and in general that the girls are all pretty unique and have different levels of strengths and needs. So I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, and I would like to say, I often hear negative things about the public schools, and the public schools can't, you know, offer very much for gifted and twice exceptional kids. And so parents spend a lot of money going to private schools that sometimes they end up having the same kind of issues. But I would say we're very lucky with our granddaughter, who is 12 and a half in LAUSD. And her needs are being met so well with a combination of things that happen in school and things that are happening because of her parents. But she has one block period that's a resource period that has kids with dyslexia or who have ADHD or, you know, other kinds of issues. And that teacher is such a great support. And all kids at the school she attends have one extra day if they're on an IEP or a 504, but then their work needs to be turned in. So that it's that combination of understanding the kids who might need a little bit more time, but not making it so open-ended that the kids can just decide not to do the work. And then her passion is also fed in school, where one of her classes is theater. And after school, one day a week, she goes to Dungeons and Dragons, which is also an option at her school at lunch, but she doesn't do it because on that same day she goes after school. So to have a school that has lunchtime, you know, passion options, that it could be theater, or it could be chess, or it could be Dungeons and Dragons, or it could be all kinds of things like that, where a school that feeds both the academics and the neurodivergence of kids as well as their passions, I think it's just great. And that's within a public school.
That's such a good point, Paula. And, you know, I should point out that 60% of the daughters attended public schools straight through K through 12, and they obviously went on to thrive. And, you know, as Paula mentioned, of a mother of a high school math teacher who's taught for 19 years, and Paula being a teacher for many years, you know, I think it's so important that we, again, maybe kind of like I'm suggesting for mothers, you know, stepping back and widening the lens. I think it's important for us to widen the lens when we approach schools and not get into, quote, teacher bashing, and realizing that both parents and teachers are basically on the same team trying to help kids learn. And that if there are issues, chances are it's systemic, you know, lack of resources or whatever. And it seems like maybe trying to have a little bit more positive approach would be helpful.
Questions are still coming in. So we've got a number to try to get through here. And I know it's already after 1 o'clock, but this is being recorded if anyone needs to drop off. As a, and this is a bit of a follow-up, the idea of the autonomous learner that Paula had mentioned. What are some resources for us to learn more on how to help with this, especially when they need help with executive function? And especially in places like where I am in California, where there are no special gifted programs or IEPs for giftedness.
Well, there's a book that I'm reading now for the second time that I really love, and it's called The Self-Driven Child. And the authors of this book talk about how when there's a child who has executive functioning or ADHD or other reasons that they need a lot of support, there can get to be a point where the child becomes a reluctant learner. Other people are going to continue, do this. Did you remember to take your papers? Did you do this? Take this out. Here's when you do it. And as any of us who've been parents or grandparents have probably heard the statement, you're not the boss of me. Well, there are lots of twice exceptional kids who feel like they're always being told what to do, told by the teacher, told by the parents. And so the brain can just go and idle and not try to figure out for itself, what should I be doing now? And in this book, they talk about how parents should become consultants and ask the kids, you know, what's your plan for this? Do you need help with this? Can we get someone to help you? And I'm starting with the clients that I work with to actually ask that question. And I'm doing it with our 9-year-old grandson and say, do you want to be the leader of your life? Do you want to be the driver of your life? Or do you want people always telling you what to do? And it's pretty clear he wants to be a driver of his life. And I said, and the more you show you can take leadership over your life, the more chances you're going to get to do things you'd like to do. And so I think a lot of this needs to be looking at our parenting. Do we have a parenting style that's going to allow kids to not get A's all the time, to have papers turned in late? I'm encouraging teachers to hold fast, even if the child is twice exceptional. If you say they get 2 extra days, if the papers aren't being turned in, then have the child start losing, you know, points. Have there be some kind of consequences. What we can't do is all this pushing, and then on the other end, no consequences to it getting done. So it needs to be done in a way that gets the child to be more autonomous. And again, it really depends upon the child and what the child's issues are, which is why, you know, Lea and I are consultants or parent coaches to be able to help parents work through the individual issues of their child, because there really isn't a one size fits all.
And, you know, maybe I'd add to that, and I'm just thinking, you know, I don't think I have any great answer to this, but it seemed like in the study, there were a number of daughters, like the last one I mentioned, who, you know, could be considered, quote, underachievers, or, you know, who really struggled. But then when they got into a field that they really were excited about, that they just, like, you know, this one daughter who got into art history, and she'd already, well, the one who I mentioned who did the false personas, she really hated school, and it was a constant battle with her parents until they finally gave up when she was middle school, and they just kind of let her be. And but then she went on to college and found art history, and now she has a PhD and she's a professor. So it does seem like, you know, even if some children are really, really struggling in the younger grades, if they find something that they're really excited about, they'll be okay. I don't know. What do you think about that, Paula?
Yeah, and I want to follow up on that. There are a lot of parents of gifted children that I meet. They feel like they don't want their kids to end up in community college. And they have a negative view about what people are like who go to community college. I went to community college. My husband went to community college. Any of you who saw my presentation with a profoundly gifted adult, Professor Burek, he went to community college. So you don't want to use that as a negative and say to your child, do you want to end up in community college someday? You know, because maybe going all the way through the K-12 system, it's not going to meet their needs, and they're going to need to go to community college. And that's where the spark is going to happen, because they get to choose their classes. I mean, so much is chosen for kids up through 12th grade, that I agree with Lea. Some of the blossoming, the awareness, I mean, the frontal lobe, now they're saying, doesn't even completely come online until late 20s or 30s. And some of us are looking at older ages where most of us have fully functioning executive skills, and we don't understand why the kids don't. So some of it has to do with maturity. Some of it has to do with parenting. Some of it has to do with the children. It's just all very complicated.
Yes, thank you. Another one of our listeners commented that Seth Perler on YouTube has helped her with her daughter quite a bit. He's an executive functioning coach. You can check it out and find him on YouTube, Seth Perler. Okay, another question. As a gifted female, I never felt good enough to go for the courses or job positions that I wanted. I am now raising a profoundly gifted daughter. How can I help her develop healthy self-esteem? That's a big one.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think just your awareness is a big step towards helping her. So what do we think, Paula?
Well, I think modeling is an important thing. And for the mom, it's never too late to, you know, seek help for yourself. I'm 74, and I think I'm still a lifelong learner. I love the work that I'm doing. And I would hope if I had that issue, I would still go get help from somebody who understands gifted people, our rage to learn, our sensitivities, all the different issues that Lea talked about. They don't stop when we're done with school, and they don't stop when our daughters end up graduating from college. These issues are lifelong issues for us. So if this mom could start dealing with her issues now and talk with the daughter about what she's learning, what she wished she had known at her age, I think it would be such a great model for her daughter about wanting to reach self-actualization no matter what her age is.
That's such a good point, Paula. And I think so many of the mothers in my study had, as Carol Dweck would put it, like a growth mindset, where they were able to, they had a constant love of learning. They were constantly rechecking and things they were doing and questioning their approaches. And it seemed like they were pretty open in admitting to their children that they made mistakes, or that they, you know, were going to try to change something and do things differently. And I think, like the last mom mentioned too, so many of them had a deep love for their daughters. And it seems like in your case, obviously you care so much about your daughter that you're on this webinar, and you're, you know, self-aware, and you're really concerned about how you can do things differently as a mom. And that's huge. You know, that's huge for your daughter. And yeah.
And Lea, you know what else I was thinking about is we have to continue to search for friends, sure shelters in other gifted moms, whether we have sons or daughters, because I think about the 18 years that we've been friends and what we've been able to glean from each other, and how it's helped in my continuous growth as a mom and as a person. And so I hope there's a way that all the moms who are watching this, all the parents who are watching this can find this, because when we talk about our daughters, we're not taken as bragging to each other, because this isn't all things to brag about. There have been challenges in having gifted daughters and having twice exceptional grandchildren, but to have another person who understands you and shares a perspective and know that she respects me. Yeah, I would say having a friend like Lea has just been one of the greatest things in my life.
Thanks, Paula. I feel the same too. And I think you raise an interesting point where it's hard having a gifted daughter, because if an exceptionally gifted daughter too, because it makes it hard to share with moms with more neurotypical daughters problems that you're having, because they just think, your kid does her homework all the time and she's getting straight A's, you have no problems.
It makes me think, Lea, maybe we need to have a group for mothers of gifted daughters.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Oh, there went a thumbs up.
You got a thumbs up on that one. And some hearts too. Yay.
Whoa.
Another comment. This person's daughter is a junior in college in a science and engineering school. She's 2E and still has trouble advocating for herself. She'll be 21 years old soon, and I am still super involved in helping her. This was a very validating presentation. Thank you. So just wanted to read that. No question necessarily.
Can I just comment on that? I think like everything, like Paula mentioned, that some people just kind of blossom later. My younger daughter was twice exceptional, and I sat shoulder to shoulder with her all throughout high school doing her homework. She really didn't have, the necessary study skills and And fortunately, when she went off to college, she took that with her and she was able to do okay. But I think that, people develop differently, and, your 21-year-old daughter may surprise you. She may just get out there in the world and just be fine. But, and I think that's one thing that I hope with my book is that there were daughters who were all over the place. Some were amazing students and others not so much. They all had different issues. And the bottom line is they all turned out, quote, okay, that they're all out there in the world and they're thriving. And I think sometimes we can kind of get locked into thinking that, again, that we should follow a script for how we should deal with different problems. And I think that you have to trust your intuition and your own wisdom. You know your daughter better than anybody. And with love and support and encouragement and hope, I have a sense she'll just be fine. I don't know, Paula, what do you think about that?
Well, I was going to say places like Summit Center and other places that understand gifted and twice exceptional students,
Yes.
it is a good place for your daughter to come and talk to someone. And it's not talking to mom. There's just something different about talking
That's
to
a
someone
great idea.
who isn't mom.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I have a second grade daughter who has tested well in math. The school would like her to skip a grade in math for the next school year. Socially, emotionally, my daughter is resisting. If she's ready academically in second grade, but not emotionally, socially, what do you recommend?
Can she just skip in that one subject? Can she be subject accelerated?
It sounds like that's what they are saying. She said skip a grade just in math, which frankly, I think that sounds kind of amazing to have that option.
Yes.
However,
I'm
going to have a little caveat here. At that age, with a child that is already voicing, the autonomous learner in her is already maybe voicing, this may be too much for me emotionally. I'm going to tell you, with all the clients I've worked with and the hundreds of students that I've had in the last 45 years, the emotional life of a gifted person has to be taken such good care of, because I see some clients in their 20s and 30s who were trying to undo some of the emotional trauma from when they were younger. Not so much saying, oh, I'm a little, I could have been so far ahead in math, but I'm not. So I think letting that child voice that, because there are some other options like differentiation, allowing the child to do the harder problems. working on math Olympiad problems while the kids are working on some other things. There's something to be said about a sensitive young child wanting to be with age mates, with peers, so that socially they develop and feel good about themselves. I can't imagine a shy, sensitive child who feels insecure with their own peers now being up with older students. And you know what else I've found is that these very bright math students sometimes are beyond the next grade level students, so that I think we maybe need to see if we could differentiate, really pay attention to what is this child saying emotionally. You know, we have to look at the whole child, not just the math.
That's such a good point, Paula. And it seems like that's kind of just such a good message, is to, really listen to your child, what she really, really needs and wants.
Yeah, there are so many ways to enrich in math. I have several clients right now who we do all kinds of math things. I try to teach them the autonomous learner idea of how can you show your teacher some of the other things. Maybe you can bring some of these math Olympiad problems in to show your teacher, just how to advocate for themselves so they don't have to be put in a socially, emotionally challenging position just to have math skills met.
That's such a great point. Okay, this is the last question I've got, and we're at 1:22 now, so I think maybe this might be it. Looking for advice on raising a daughter who is 2E and the younger of 2. Her brother is older, likely profoundly gifted, and I'm trying to avoid her growing up thinking that he is the smart one. He commands a lot of attention because he is not so well adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds like it seems like talking to your daughter about issues, right? About the fact that she is in fact smart, but that she has some learning issues that you're going to support her with. I don't know. It's interesting because I had the same dynamic with my 2 girls. And now that my daughters are in their 40s, I think my younger daughter gets it, that she's equally as gifted, but in different ways. They can take the skills that they've learned. I mean, in a way, having a family dynamic like that provides such a fertile ground to learn about, I'm great at this, but this other person's great at that, and appreciating that fact. And, we tried to do that sitting around the dinner table at night. And I think we all were so aware of our younger daughter, twice exceptional daughter, how she had such brilliant insights about things that we never even realized, and so her older sister, who was much more academically gifted, realized, oh my gosh, she knows things that I would never begin to understand. And so, they took that with them, I think, out into their lives when they were grown-ups, and helped them learn that even though, and I think in the last story that I mentioned about the mom who said, I learned that, nobody's perfect and I don't have to be perfect. And I was so condescending. I think it helps them from being condescending towards people when they get out into the world, because they can stop and realize, oh, I bet this person has skills that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, and that reminds me, Lea, when we were talking to our granddaughter and our grandson was there, and I was telling her about this new idea of dyslexic design thinking. And on LinkedIn, you can even select that you have dyslexic design thinking, because so many organizations are looking for dyslexic thinkers. And I was telling them about Gil Gershoni, who has a great website, Dyslexic Design Thinking, and that when he was interviewed and talked about his own dyslexia and then was talking about his son, someone in the audience said, does your son have dyslexia? And he said, unfortunately, no. And the audience members laughed.
Great.
And he said, no, I'm being honest. Dyslexic design thinking cannot be taught. You can be taught many things, but you can't be taught to think like someone with dyslexia. And it was so cute because a little while later, after telling this to my granddaughter, my grandson said, do you think I have dyslexia?
That's great.
He doesn't, but I thought it was so cute because he had a chance to see, wow, this is a kind of a superpower maybe I'm not going to have.
That's wonderful. I really like that. And you know, that's what's so great about all the functional MRI work that's going on, looking at the gifted brain, is because it's picking up unique attributes that people have who are gifted that haven't been recognized before. Like I was reading something about how certain people in their gifted brains, they are able to impersonate others really, really well. And I thought it was interesting that a couple of moms mentioned that. But
well, we're starting to get into our little personal chats that we have.
Well,
and the audience is just kind of hanging in with us.
No, we are wrapping up. I just wanted to give a concluding comment from one of our audience members. They said, thank you for raising the topics about autonomous learning and self-advocacy and the likelihood that us moms may also be gifted. So I thought that was a nice conclusion. Thank you, everyone who came and has stayed to the end here. We're now going to conclude the presentation, and everyone who registered is going to get an email with a link to the recording, and we'll also link some of the books and things that were discussed.
oh, great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you, Lea and Paula.
Thank you, everyone who attended, and the great questions.
So I don't think Lea can see it, but she's getting lots of hearts. And
Yeah.
clapping.
And hands are floating up, Lea.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much.